Good morning, everyone. This is the August 24th meeting of the Dunn County Planning, Resource and Development Committee. I see from our screen that all members of the committee are present, including the County Board Chair, Supervisor Bartlett. So we have a quorum. Approval of the minutes from August 10th, 2021. Have a chance to look through those?
I'll move approval, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Supervisor Anderson seconds. Any discussion or corrections? It's a long meeting with lots of discussion, so good job in the minutes. All in favor of approving the minutes as presented, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? No? Okay. We did have some public comments. Mr. Carlson, are you able to read those for us?
Sure, I can do that, Tom. Let me just zoom in a little bit here. So we received two public comments. Both came in by email. The first one I'll read is from Kathy Stahl. We received this on Saturday, August 21st at 9:09 p.m. Please include the following written comments during the August 24th PR&D Committee public comments. Thank you. Thank you for considering and prioritizing economic development as a committee. Expanding from the short discussion at the most recent PR&D meeting, I request that you view economic development as a holistic, intentional effort that supports the very aspects of our county that we want to promote and protect. For instance, many in our county decry the loss of small and mid-sized farms. We are told they need help in securing the infrastructure that smaller farms can't afford or markets they can't achieve on their own. As an example, I just heard about the challenge facing local wool producers to find ways to economically prepare their fleeces. Is there a more accessible industry that could be developed to help local sheep farmers? For instance, it can be over a year before a small beef farmer can get their animals butchered for sale. What can a cooperative effort accomplish toward meeting this challenge? For instance, ag experts talk about the need to diversify crops and ag products to protect farmers from the boom and bust of a primarily three-crop ag base: corn, soybeans, and dairy. Marketing efforts to promote a more diverse ag production would help producers whose time is consumed with, as their name suggests, production. Farmers Union and Farm Bureau are discussing this. How can county economic development help with this effort? At a recent PR&D meeting, it was again pointed out that our groundwater nitrate levels are increasing. We are told by land use and water quality experts that regenerative ag will improve our water quality. Is there more Dunn County Economic Development can do to support what our Land and Water Conservation Division is promoting? It is easy to believe intentional marketing and targeting of our farmers' economic interests will, to quote Dunn County's comprehensive plan, help protect economically productive areas, including farmland and forests, while working toward the additional comp plan goal to improve water quality in Dunn County. To further support ag-related economic development, you may recall that the ad hoc groundwater committee recommended, quote, establish a county initiative to support agricultural diversity as an economic development and water quality strategy. It is noteworthy that on the ad hoc recommendations progress report, it is marked red as no action has been taken. Why is that? Similarly, the ad hoc groundwater recommendations included, quote, establish a water resources council to provide ongoing collaboration on water quality and quantity issues with interested stakeholders, developing and including various local water specialists and stakeholders on an advisory council would expand the public engagement in improving our local water quality, offer knowledgeable feedback to our county agencies and policymakers, and increase collaboration among relevant nonprofits, professional, for-profit companies, agencies, policymakers, consumers, and landowners toward jointly developed water quality goals. At the end of the ad hoc groundwater committee meetings, I asked a couple of the professional members if they would be interested in being on such a volunteer council. They said they would. Why aren't we building on that sort of commitment and possibility of helpful engagement? Thank you for including my comments and questions. Respectfully shared, Catherine Stahl.
Well, as usual, Kathy's comments are to the point and very helpful. I think I would just say that we expect to be making progress on more progress and clear planning process for that progress. And we'll be discussing that today with a report from our staff. And I think the ad hoc groundwater committee is clearly something we need to look at. And I think I promise Kathy, and I think the committee members would agree that that will be on our agenda for discussion as we start framing up our action plan a little more clearly. So thank you, Catherine Stahl, for your wonderful comments. Anybody else have any thoughts? Okay, move on, John.
Okay, the second comment we received was from Mr. Terry Nichols. It again was by email, came in on Sunday, August 22nd at 1:28 p.m. Public comments for PR&D meeting. I agree with Supervisor Kinnear about removing the ENS director from the org chart. I don't think Dunn County can afford another layer of management at this point in time. It seems Dunn County is already struggling to fill positions in the county. Worker shortage is a huge problem across Wisconsin and the country. The Synergy Cenex store in the village of Colfax is offering a $500 sign-on bonus to get workers. Most of these employees are part-time. Many are high schoolers looking for part-time work locally. I have never seen this before. Broadband is an important tool for economic development. I watch meetings of Governor Evers' Broadband Task Force Committee, and in other Wisconsin counties, it seems UW Extension is taking a major role in the promotion of broadband. In a town of Colfax board meeting last month, the town board approved $65,000 of ARPA funds for yet another project with Bloomer Tel, reaching another 70 households. This is the third project with Bloomer Tel. Realtors will tell you one of the first questions potential rural home builders will ask is, what are the internet services like? I support the public comments by John Sipple at the PR&D meeting August 10th. The county has spent a tremendous amount of time and people's participation to develop these major reports relating to environmental concerns. I congratulate the county for the manure management ordinance, and nutrient management plans are a must. I would personally like to keep the spreading of human septage on agricultural land and decisions locally on the legislative agenda, if only to have the DNR update their information as to where these sites are currently located throughout the state. Water testing is a must, especially when you have CAFOs expanding land to accommodate increased animal units. I question the sustainability of the current laws in place. I have been told in the past by DNR employees that they do not have the staff to monitor CAFO operations more closely, and currently most operations are self-regulating. Respectfully, Terry Nichols, Town of Colfax.
Again, thank you, Terry, for your always really insightful and thoughtful comments. And we will address all of your points for sure. Anyone else have any response? Okay. It's really, I kind of miss the opportunity to have public come to our meetings and talk to us ahead of the meeting, but the Zoom is good too. So it's working out well. We don't have a public hearing today. And we have some items that I think we get through fairly quickly and then get down to the draft budget. I probably would suggest that when we get down to number 8, we flip the A and B so that we can discuss the budget first and then get onto the legislative agenda. But let's move on to the staff report on the review of groundwater ad hoc committee recommendations. Mr. Cummings?
Sure. Thank you, Supervisor Quinn. So I included in the packet for all of you just a highlight of some bulleted items that I took from the last committee meeting or 2 committee meetings ago to try to highlight and give a little better timing on it. I've invited Heather Wood, our water resource specialist within our division, to kind of help me out on this. A lot of her work is involved in some of these items. So we'll try to touch base on the progress on these particular ones here on this list, give you an estimated timeline and some of the realities around some of those items. And then item number 7 is related, but was also part of the request, was to highlight a little bit more of what we've been working on with the town of Colfax. So we'll try to make this as quick as possible to give you an update, but if you have questions along the way, please interrupt me. And I'll ask Heather to weigh in here on each one of these items. But the first item, private well testing and data collection program. So part of one of the ad hoc recommendations was looking into that. And currently, we do have test kits available within the county. There are test kits available through the WIC program, through public health, as well as other test kits available through the public health office, through our local Colfax lab, as well as the Eau Claire County Public Health Department. We have had a meeting with KT and Public Health, Heather and I, to kind of look at where we sit on some of these things as far as private well testing. Obviously, funding is always an issue that we need to overcome, but currently citizens within the county can contact our office or public health and request a kit to sample their well. That kit, or the expense for that test would be on that landowner. So there is not funding to fund that. We are in the process of likely getting additional test kits through UW Stevens Point's Water and Environmental Analysis Lab, and have provide those here as well. The benefit of having that lab as a participant in this is that data then is aggregated into a statewide database that can be assessed by policymakers and citizens alike across the state. We're hoping just to get those additional kits here yet this month is kind of our goal. And with that said, we have currently test kits available, and likely will begin to promote that, try to promote that more in the avenues that we have. Heather, do you have any other comments on that particular item?
I guess I can just add, like you said, funding is always an issue, and a test is approximately $55, if I remember correctly, at least through Stevens Point. That being said, I've been kind of digging around and seeing what I can find for grant programs to maybe fund something, but unfortunately there isn't a whole lot. But if anybody has any alternative funding ideas, I'm all ears there. Ideally, we'd like to get a well testing program going, but
I would add that currently citizens can submit data, their well results to either public health or our office. They'll eventually make their way to Heather, and she is entering them into a database, which then feeds the well water viewer that we'll talk about here in a couple items. Any questions from the committee on that first part?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Supervisor Kinnear.
Yes.
Just want to emphasize then that a lot of times we don't need a grant because public are willing to test their wells. The key is to get it into our database. And did you just say that if we have something that we can give it to Heather and it will get put in our database?
yep. I'm working with Rachel and Land Information to get stuff entered and put into one countywide conglomerate aggregate database. So if you have anything, by all means, send it my way.
Okay, and that's the database that Rachel worked on and developed. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I just have one, and that's if we could develop a plan for outreach on this, and I don't know if it's simply a poster or a press release or an article that we could put in on various servers or news media saying that this is available to people when we're ready for that. I think it would be really helpful. We could have a program. It sounds like we just need to tell people we have one and be ready to accept and assist their efforts. Because I think Mike is right. Many people will choose to do it on their own. So this looks really good.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm just wondering if we could have a kit that they could come and get and, send it in, and then we would get the results for that. I'm wondering if some of the hesitancy for people getting tested is that they just don't know where to go to do that. And if we could somehow have a kit available, you stop in, you pay $50 or whatever it is, and you get this kit, you go home, you send the sample in, and they would get the results, and so would the county. It would make it so that people know where to go to get it done. Right now, I really don't know where to go to get my well sampled. And I would guess there's a lot of people out there that don't know that.
Mr. Chairman, may I chime in?
Sure.
Thank you, Chairman Bartlett. I'm one of those too. I live right in the town of Menominee, and for years I've been going to the commercial testing lab in Colfax, picking up the little bottle and kit and taking it home and filling it up, and then taking it up to Colfax commercial testing lab. And doing that. But my question is, do they send the results in? Because I never have, and I wondered if it's in the database.
It would not be. And one of the things that Chase and I have kind of discussed, one of the reasons that we recommend Stevens Point, all data that's sent into Stevens Point is put into a statewide database. Whereas with the Colfax commercial lab, it is a private company, and as such, they do not release any data. So if you wanted your data from Colfax put into our county database, you, the homeowner, would have to send that to me. They won't release any information to us up in Colfax.
Well, if I can follow up, there might be a lot of people like me that don't. I know I used to take it up to Egg Source. You can pick up the bottles there, and that goes to Stevens Point, correct?
I'm not sure. Chase, do you know?
Through Ag, I'm not sure, Supervisor Anderson, if where Ag Source sends theirs. I mean, they're a lab themselves, so I believe they do some of their own water testing now. But I think that's kind of the key thing here is that so also to Chairman Bartlett's comments, right now a citizen can walk in to the county building here through public health or our office and likely get a kit. They can take that kit home. They can follow directions, sample their water, send it in with their check to the lab, whether that's a public health lab in Eau Claire or the CTL lab in Colfax, and then they can get their results back. Part of the goals that we've discussed here internally is long-term, how do we continue to build our database to better understand our water quality situation in the county? And to do that, we're not going to prohibit landowners from submitting their samples to CTL. But if they would like their data as part of that database, they would need to submit that data on their own. Having a public lab can help that process along, be more efficient. But currently, we would have the availability for someone to come in. And I think the key point is just advertising that, to making that more well-known to Chairman Quinn's point.
Good idea.
I also think that part of our goal is if and when at some point funding is available to broaden our water testing program, we're working on an ideal water test program for private wells. So, for example, looking at areas of the county that may be lacking in data, that if money's available, can we go there and administer a program through the township or more advertising to get more samples taken? Or if there's a process by which we can sample 50 or 100 wells a year and on a reoccurring basis travel across the county so we get coverage in the whole county. So I think the intentions for us internally is to have a more robust program available when funding is available so we can act on it at that time.
Okay, thanks, Chase. Let's move on to the next item.
Sure. So item number 2, private well data privacy and public records request procedures. So this is refers to the idea that, we get data from a private citizen for their well, and how are we going to manage that data? I'm currently in the process of trying to connect with Corp Counsel to review a few things to make sure that we're on the same page as far as we have a database. It has private well samples on it. It has, names and potentially addresses. And if citizens are concerned about their data going up on a website, we want to ensure that there is some level of privacy for that. And on the next item, I'll show you just a real brief clip of the map again as to how that's going to be displayed. But how are we to handle public records requests if they're to come in for this data? How do we share that data in a way that can still provide a level of privacy or certainty, still encourage people to participate in getting their well tested, but also meet the requirements for the legal requirements for privacy. Other concerns that have come up that we should try to vet out as well is marketability of properties, properties that may have higher well tests. Are those going to impact the sale of those properties? And how do we manage that through our work here as well, if it's manageable? So with that, we're looking here to try to wrap that up here in September, so that way we can have the opportunity to release the next item, which is that well water viewer to the public. So again, just some legal things that we want to make sure we touch base on, so we're not so we know how to handle them and be prepared to handle them. If there's any questions on that particular item, I'd be happy to take them now. Otherwise, I'll jump in and to the next item and just show you a real quick reminder of what that viewer looks like. So Tom Carlson, if you wouldn't mind, letting me share. Can everyone see the mapping screen has a welcome page on it? Okay, Heather's shaking her head. So this is kind of a terms and conditions that Rachel and the Land Information Office has put together regarding this data. It kind of talks about some of the background of the data. I guess I'm not expecting you to read it all at this time, but if you'd like to, I can share this with you at a later date. But looking at how the data was summarized and how some of the disclaimer as far as its accuracy and what we're looking at. So I just wanted to show you the level of detail that we would be getting into. So, we start looking at areas of the county. We have, as you zoom in, it's going to change color. So right now, anything in yellow, the averages of the well data that we have is between 5 and 10 milligrams per liter nitrate. As you zoom in, you can get into a more of a section level. And this will then, the legend corresponds with the color of the section. The closer you zoom in, it no longer changes. So as a reminder, some of these sections could have one well in them that was tested 30 years ago, or they could have multiple wells that have been tested that are very recent. So again, the interpretation of the data, the data detail is important when looking at this, but this is the reality of the water samples that we have in this database. And this is what we're intending to provide on the website so people can view this. This is somewhat of a replicate of what the Wisconsin Well Water Viewer is through UW-Stevens Point. So a lot of the data that's in here was supported through those sources as well. Is the groundwater retrieval network with DNR. And any data that we receive here at the county is funneled then through Heather, and then she updates the spreadsheets and then works with Rachel and Land Information to make sure that the data is accurate and it's displayed accordingly. So any questions on that portion?
Chase, Mike here. When you zoom in and click on one of the smaller ones, does it tell you how many wells are tested in that area?
Yep, that's a good point. Thank you. So yeah, like I just clicked on that section. There are 4 samples with some minimum, maximum, and average. Again, we don't know this is not gonna display the age of those samples, but we certainly have that data running in the background, and we could do, more in-depth queries if we were wanting to prepare for an individual's request or, a presentation to a particular community. So.
Thank you.
Okay, I will stop sharing again real quick, and then I'll share again later for the last item. But the next item was looking at groundwater quality content for the new website. And basically, we have a website right now. Public Health has groundwater information on it. We are working to develop a framework for more data to be and content to be available on our website and the county as a whole. And I know I'll let Heather kind of talk a little bit more about the details of that content and where we're at on that. And I think it's going to tie into item number 5. So Heather, if you want to just comment on the content for the new website and then talk about the new website at the same time, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. So the map is of course going to be a big part of the website, but information without context can be dangerous, can be a dangerous thing. And that's what I personally believe the map would be, without any sort of contextual information to explain the wide variety of reasons behind why groundwater could have high nitrates. I mean, I'm sure it's not much of a surprise, but land use can have a big play in it, but so can the depth of the casing or any number of items, which we'll talk about later in the presentation that Chase has. So we wanted to kind of get the map and the contextual information together and put out on one page. We had a meeting with Krista Vind, and she, is working on getting the whole county website moved over. Personally, I'm kind of leaning towards waiting until she's gotten that done. And if memory serves, then we would be looking at a end of year date for when we could have a groundwater website up and running that has all of that contextual information, that has the map, that has everything that we're wanting it to have, including information about the testing program that we have available right now with, like Chase mentioned, the Expecting Parents program and the kits available through public health. Yeah, so I'm working on getting kind of a rough outline of what we want the website to look like for ease of use, and giving all of the information to folks so they can actually learn about what could be influencing their groundwater.
And I would just add that, we certainly will pursue advertising the current availability of kits now, and rather than waiting to the end of the year till the new website's rolled out. But for us to go in currently and update our web pages with some of this other new content, it's somewhat duplicate of resources and energy when the whole county website is going to be rebuilt. We can certainly feed this in with some new pages, and that's where we're working with Krista and IT on getting that set up. So we will have kind of maybe looking at to the point of item number 6 of our interim website. We'll attempt to, when we get some of these things ironed out, put as much information on there as we can without duplicating too many resources through a new website rebuild. But again, begin to advertise, try to provide those awareness that we have the groundwater monitoring program available. And then, and as we progress through the new website rebuild, we'll have a much better page that can be more informative and more user-friendly. Any questions on any of those things? So, basically that's trying to time that with the website rebuild, which Heather mentioned would be completed by the end of the year at the latest, is what we've been working with. Okay.
Any questions?
Yep, go ahead.
Go ahead, Chase.
All right. I guess the last thing, item number 7, I'll try to run through here briefly, but Tom, if I could share my screen again real quick. right, everyone should be able to see a slide that says Colfax Nitrate on it. Okay. So I am going to, one of the requests at the previous meeting was just to go into a little bit more detail as to our work with the town of Colfax. So I'll probably skip a few slides that are a little bit more detailed than maybe we have time for today, but I'd be certainly willing to answer questions. Basically, a little background on this is the town of Colfax has had an opportunity to do some well testing in their community. That data has come through our office to be incorporated into our aggregate data. And then the township reached out to us to kind of help with some interpretation of the data. So as we click through here, Heather and I will try to provide a little brief information on it. One thing to mention is that we've been invited to attend a Zoom meeting with the town of Colfax at a joint meeting between their planning commission and their town board to present some of this interpretation. And this interpretation is based on work that we've done with Dave Johnson with DNR. He's a hydrogeologist, a longtime hydrogeologist, interpreter of a lot of this data. So that meeting is coming up or scheduled for the end of September here. And we're likely it's open to the public, but that's facilitated through the town. And we've been asked to present. So this is some of the highlights of that information that we'll try to get into. But basically, this map is data that has been collected by the township. They provided this map. The areas in blue are wells that have tested higher than the 10 milligrams per liter nitrate standard. And in some of those sections, you'll see multiple wells that have been sampled. Again, here is another map of the township looking at where wells have been sampled. This is a similar view of our well water viewer, but this is actually Stevens Point. And this presentation was put together by DNR, but just looking at where those specific wells and data have been sampled beyond what the actual Colfax citizens have been doing for this program. This is all the data that's been available in recent history. So as you can see down here, the lower left, about 9% exceed the health standard of wells tested in the township.
Jason, can I ask a question? That Stevens Point data, is that derived from multiple sources, including private landowner testing? Or is it all? Okay.
Yep, that is correct. So most public labs, including the State Lab of Hygiene in Madison, as well as anything that goes through DNR and the Groundwater Retrieval Network, and anything through the Stevens Point lab is aggregated into the well water viewer for the state. Ours is a portion of that that pertains to Dunn County, and then any information that we have that we can gather will feed our website, but certainly if it's through Point, it'll be feeding that website as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to skip here to this slide. So this is a number of different tables looking at town nitrates. So the upper left, the red line is the trend line for the town of Colfax, and this is based on samples collected from about February of 1982 all the way through June of 2020 is what is feeding this data set right now. And based on the nitrate data collected, the trend is that the nitrate level is increasing in private wells within the town. The upper right chart looks at well depth and comparison to the nitrate concentration within those wells that are tested. So you can see as you get into the right-hand side of that chart, looking at the 10 parts per million and look at and head to the right, you'll see that the well depth is fairly consistent when we're starting to see those nitrates increase. Similarly, looking at the lower left chart, looking at casing depth, the depth of the casing is very important into determining or impacting quality of water. So you could have a 100-foot well, open borehole, and the casing be 30 feet deep into the ground, and then looking at where that water table is. Are we actually protecting that water from the impacts from the land use and the contribution area for the well? But again, looking at casing depth here in this lower left, looking at the 10 milligrams per liter or parts per million, heading to the right, the majority of the wells that are testing high, their casing depth is less than 50 feet. The lower right hand chart now is where things even get more interesting, and looking at the depth of the casing into the water table. So on the top here, we have casing and the static water level, and the nitrate concentration here in the middle. So when you look at nitrate concentrations of 10 milligrams per liter, and going to the right, our casing depth and into the static water level is quite shallow. So we're having a very little bit of casing that goes into the water table itself. The part of the graph that's circled here, when you look at nitrate concentration of 0 or relatively low, so less than 2, and typically anything less than 2 is considered to be background or natural nitrate concentration levels, you'll see that the depth of the casing into the water table is quite high. And as you can read this text here on the side, wells cased to 60 feet or more below the water table have lower nitrate. So when we look at well construction, that's always, and Heather mentioned that earlier when we're trying to interpret some of the well data on a map, is each well is unique. Each well is unique to its location and to its construction and to the land use around it. And if there's things that we can consider in the future or ways that we can help citizens interpret their wells, their well data, is looking at that casing depth, but the casing depth into the water table. And if there's recommendations to the way this data shows right now, that there is a break point as to when you are having an impact on the quality of the water. So in theory, that deeper casing into the water table is pulling older water that likely has lower nitrate levels. This is a different chart or set of information that basically describes the same thing I just did, only in a little different format. And we have been told by DNR that information like this, in this type of context, is going to be available to all townships in the state at some point in hopefully the near future. So again, looking at the trends of all the data that can be collected for a township, and looking at where we have these the impacts for water quality and how they are related to the well construction themselves. So that can help provide more information to local authorities as far as elected officials and policymakers. This is the town of Colfax looking from a well sampling program from 1986 and 87. There is one well in 1986 and 87 that tested above the safe drinking water standard, and that's down here on a lower portion of the map with a 13. Otherwise, majority of them are in that lower range, well below the safe drinking water standard, but still above the PAL or the preventative action limit. So when you get above 2, there is impact by humans on that landscape, and those are likely the impacts to that water. This is just a chart or a map showing the groundwater elevation. So looking at groundwater flow direction. So when we are working with a landowner or a group of landowners to look at interpretation of well data, we need, and where the potential sources are, we need to look at groundwater flow. And in many times the groundwater elevation map contours follow similarly to the natural ground topography, but in many cases, a point here would be looking at the Red Cedar River that comes through Colfax. You have 18-Mile Creek, and the general groundwater flow direction is still going to have a greater pull to feed the Red Cedar River. So it's going to head towards the river and not necessarily towards the creek. So if you have a well that's next to the creek of 18-Mile Creek and trying to figure out your contribution area, it might not be directly north. It's going to be kind of on a northeast southwest fashion because that pull of the Red Cedar River, infiltration, the water needs to have a place to exit, and it's typically to surface water. So that's the direction. You can see that by those contour lines where the flow would be in that direction. Obviously, bedrock has a large impact on it, and the depth of bedrock. How much soil do we have above it? What's the type of soil? And then once the water gets into the bedrock, how easily is it movable? Is it to move? And what type of other impacts does that have? This was depth to bedrock, and this is the type of bedrock. So looking at sandstone formations in a lot of parts of our county. And we wouldn't be respectful to this process without talking about land use. And land use has a tremendous impact on our surface and groundwater, as all of you know already. But when we look at the type of land use in our community, agricultural is one of the top land uses. And we tend to see, and this is a statewide perspective as well, tend to see higher nitrate concentrations in areas that are primarily agriculture versus areas that are in set-aside land or forested. This is an interesting picture here. DNR put this together for us to try to look at and help us comprehend depth of well, depth of casing into water tables, as well as where they are in the landscape. So from recharge areas to discharge areas like surface water, you can see groundwater flow paths. You can see these the terminology here for days that the water is old. So when you get closer to a recharge area that is closer to a discharge area, that water is very, very young. And as you move further away from that discharge area, you go deeper, that water is much older. So when we talk about depth of casing into the water table, that's important to look at age of the water, but also, are we in a recharge area or are we on a discharge area, and how that water flows? So there's a few graphics put on here for the depth of wells, well casing, and whether they may have higher nitrate or lower nitrate. And again, looking at well depth here on the left, over time, well depth has increased. So we're seeing, and this is going back to 1943 through basically present day, and looking at, we're starting to see deeper wells drilled. Again, that's over here on the right is then looking at casing depth though, and that seems to be just as important as the well depth, if not more, and how far that casing goes into the static water level. So looking at, in general, where are our nitrate concentrations? So here is 10, the safe drinking water standard. And where is the well casing depths for the wells that are all testing above 10? And most of them are in that 50 feet above the water table or 50 feet below the water table. And in that range is where we tend to have our highest concentrations. A few key points that were provided by DNR, which are consistent with information that I've read for many years, also information put out by a lot of the groundwater reports for the entire state. 90% of nitrates come from agricultural inputs. Obviously, there are septic and other human inputs as well into that fold, but the larger land uses, specifically in rural areas, nitrates tend to come from the agricultural side. Well construction is important, looking at depth of casing into the water table. And then also geology, again, the bedrock, what layers are preventing nitrates from penetrating into that water table. One thing we didn't really get into a little bit, but is location within the flow field. And, if you have a well that is in the middle of a cornfield, the risk is elevated for higher nitrates in that well than it would be if that well was in the middle of a forested landscape. Not always the case, again, uniqueness of that well is important, but the concentration area for that and that flow direction to where that groundwater is sourced from has an impact. And then again, climate at the bottom here, looking at increased precipitation events, also increased recharge. It also has potentially a dilution factor. So droughts tend to strand nitrogen in the soil column and then release it all once that soil profile flushes out, and then creates higher spikes. So this is the last slide, just to try to give you a little bit idea what we've been working with Colfax on. Again, like I said, we'll be presenting to them. Heather and I will be presenting and discussing this with them here at the end of September. With that, Heather, is there anything that I missed or you want to add to?
I don't believe so. I mean, the main thing that I note is that there is some seasonality to it. So, just a side note for folks that do test their wells, try and catch it, the recommendation is about every 15 months. So that way you're getting a variety of seasons.
Yep. Yeah, so I guess with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chairman Quinn, with any questions or other details. This type of information is something that, as I mentioned, it will be coming out hopefully in the near future for all townships. And I think we see it as part of our programming, part of Heather's programming. She's been working a lot on this, and would likely see, more work with other towns or on a larger county scale as well. So.
Thank you very much, Chase and Heather also. This is exactly what the committee's been looking for. So really appreciate it. Any questions or comments from the committee?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Anderson.
Chase, thank you. This is excellent information, and I really appreciate it. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking, I remember going way back, we're talking township of Colfax, when there was the ferry pit that the Red Cedar River ran through, and it was used basically by the village of Colfax and other years for a dump site. And of course, that's all been changed for the good. And now it's conservancy, and what a great improvement. And as I look at what's going on around here and in that particular area, sometimes we need to tout our successes. And I think that's a huge success area. And then the other comment I have, Chase, is that Mike Kinnear and I both live in a township of Menominee. We both have our own private wells. And I was thinking, Mike, you can chime in. Maybe all of us need to, as county supervisors, need to work a little closer with our townships and urging them to follow up. I haven't met with our town chairman on this, Mike Kinnear, maybe you have. And I know I've kind of done my own thing here. I've tested my own well, and I haven't done it the right way. I need to make sure that it gets shared with everybody. So Chase, I just appreciate your comments and what I've learned today. So thank you.
If I could respond, I think, Heather talked about context with the data being released on the website. And I think some of this information is exactly what she's working on, is helping citizens, when you look at that map, to not just assume that their water is bad if that section is yellow or worse. We need to make sure that people understand that you need to test your water, and you need to know your well construction. You need to look at it individually on a land use base, the zone of contribution to those wells. And just because it's yellow on a map doesn't mean that all the water in that section is bad. And this goes to the importance of what Heather was talking about, of making sure that we get all this context accurate to a level that people can understand that when they look at the map. Whether or not they read all of it, we'll try to make it as inviting as possible. But this way, when townships look at our website or call us, we can reference them to certain things, and they can start to consider that when they interpret or assist their citizens in interpreting some of their water.
Mr. Chairman.
Any other comments, Diane?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want, excuse me, I just wanted to say to Heather and Chase, thank you very much for working on this. It's extremely helpful and very well done. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just the same thing. I'd like to say ditto to Diane there. And this is just what we're looking for with the ad hoc committee. This thing. So nice. Well done, both of you.
And I would just add, I know this is going on almost 6 months that I've been here, and things maybe aren't as progressing, especially specifically with the groundwater ad hoc as much as we maybe even us internally would like, but we're getting our feet under us. I think there's some good things to come, and I appreciate the comments and the encouragement, because I think we're on the right track, and I think we can do some good things. It's just time is always the key thing. So
one thing that strikes me, it's just something maybe to look into. We can check into it, but I'm wondering if we did want to do a more targeted testing program and money was a question, it might be that we could explore whether towns or villages, towns in particular, could use any of their ARPA funds to tie into the kind of a planned testing strategy going forward.
I think just to comment on that, that's been something that I've thought of too, and actually inquired a little bit about with Paul and Keith. Just throwing an idea out there.
Yeah.
Looking for an idea whether or not it's eligible. When I read the ARPA funds, it looks like a lot of infrastructure. I think there's some arguments to be made whether private well system is infrastructure, and whether or not we can at least look at one-off or one-time funding to gather a whole bunch of data. Obviously, understanding that source of money is not reoccurring in perpetuity, but we can maybe knock out a bunch of information in a hurry. So
good. Could be really important. All right, let's move on then. Thanks a lot, Chase. Thanks, Heather, for that. Next up is a couple of items just for discussion purposes and review. We wanted to come back to a little bit of review of the economic development discussion that we started last time. And then several committee members have asked for a discussion on the ENS organization chart. So let's start with A. Is Mr. Miller on the call at this time?
I am.
Paul, do you have any sort of, we touched on this last time. We didn't get into it a lot, but do you have any additional thoughts on it?
Yes. First and foremost, we conducted interviews for zoning administrator last week. And we have a candidate that we are prepared to make the offer to. We're doing the due diligence on background checks and references. One of the questions that we asked the candidate, all the candidates that we interviewed, was what do they know about economic development? And some knew more and some knew less. But the bottom line is to remind the committee that what this idea of having our zoning administrator involved in economic development is a response to a desire that we have heard for more leadership on the county's part in economic development, not replacing any efforts that are being made by other organizations, whether the Dunn County Economic Development Corporation or the Greater Menominee Development Corporation, or the individual efforts of the various chambers of commerce, but to add to it by having a presence, a county employee that is also involved in encouraging and participating in economic development efforts. The fact of the matter is that this is something that I believe the zoning administrator can do without it becoming overwhelming, because we're not talking about a full-time economic development position. We're not talking about somebody who devotes 8 hours a day, 5 days a week to trying to attract new businesses or retain existing businesses or help existing businesses expand or reaching out to the various industry reps, but rather somebody who can participate in the meetings of the Greater Menominee Development Corporation or the Dunn County Economic Development Corporation or the Chambers of Commerce, who can become familiar with the areas that are prime for development around each of our communities and be a resource to the various industries, whether it's residential, industrial, commercial, can work with those communities on facilitating it and discuss and perhaps workshop with them on ways of easing and encouraging economic development throughout the county. And that these duties are not would not take up a huge portion of their activity, of their time, but it would be something that they would do as part of their regular activities. So we have finally comment for the committee, of course, is we can require this, we can request this of the new zoning administrator now. I mean, regardless, it does not necessarily require the thumbs up from the oversight committee, but that is desirable, which is why we brought it to the committee for discussion. We think it's a good idea. We think it's something we'd like to try. We won't know until we try whether or not it's a good idea in general or in specific with whomever we end up hiring. Maybe they're good at it, maybe they're not, maybe they have time for it, maybe they don't, but it's something that we think is worth trying to do.
Judy, I'm on a Zoom meeting.
Jim is in a meeting apparently. So that's those are the comments I have, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Let me, Diane.
I don't want us to get into micromanaging, and please don't interpret this question as such, but how would we know, since, I have concerns about workload. How do we know how much time would get spent in this? How would we keep track of that, right? And it compared to the other responsibilities that accrue to the zoning administrator?
By regular checking in between me and the zoning administrator, which is something that I think we're going to end up doing anyway. The candidate that we are going to offer the position to will require some mentoring anyway. By fortunate coincidence, as you know, I have a lot of background in planning and zoning, and to a much more limited degree, but a great deal of familiarity with economic development. So I will be working with the zoning administrator, not only on onboarding this person with our organization and our needs, but providing some mentoring and some guidance, and it'll be a two-way conversation. So we'll be able to gauge together the effort that is able to be put into economic development, whether or not it's too much. And that's exactly the sort of experiment I think that we're going to have to be open to, whatever the outcome is, positive or negative. Whether or not it is something that works, we may come to the conclusion in the worst case scenario, yeah, it was a nice idea, but it is too much work. Or we may come to the conclusion that it's not only a nice idea, but it does work. It fits in well with the scope and scale of duties. So I'll be very sensitive, Supervisor Morehouse, to the workload of this person. We want people to succeed in our organization.
Exactly. Thank you.
Any other comments? I do have just a thought. I mean, I tend to support this and encourage administration to consider this. I think after sitting in on the interviews last week, that if the person we have decided to offer to were to take the job, they would clearly be interested in this, and I think over time have the ability to manage a thoughtful and productive commitment to it. The other thing is to get back to the comments from Kathy Stahl at the beginning of the meeting, public comments. The Groundwater Ad Hoc Committee did recommend that the county find a way to put resources into encouraging a kind of economic development that ties in with our diversified farming base. And for this committee to at least have one link to economic development means I think that we could have potential to have some sort of thoughtful strategy with regard to that, or at least more potential than we have right now, because we don't really have anybody on staff who has that in their quiver, as it were. So I think it could be helpful in that area too. Any other comments? Okay.
I also tend to agree, Chairman Quinn. If we're talking about a point person providing county leadership, coordinating, participating, be a resource, these are all things that Mr. Miller talked about. It seems like a real reasonable thing. And when Kathy's comment was read, that came to mind immediately too. So I think it's a good idea.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll move on then. So what's the next one is the
Organizational
Mr.
chart.
Chairman.
oh, the org chart. Yeah. Mr. Supervisor Anderson, you have a comment?
Oh, thank you. I was muted.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jim. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I was muted. And well, I would like to take a little bit different perspective, if I might. Back in 1991, the executive committee of the Dunn County Board of Supervisors formed the Dunn County Economic Development Corporation, a 501c6. And they were made up of representation all over the county, villages, townships, county board supervisors, large businesses, small businesses, business, stout, everybody. And you know, I think it worked. My concern is that if we get it in planning and zoning, any of this, when that, like Supervisor Morehouse said, that job was full. That job is already a full-time job or more for planning and zoning. And I guess I'll have to state that I'm a little concerned that we add more to that job now for our new person that we would employ, and keep Economic Development Corporation like it has been and has worked for 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else? Okay. So then we'll move on to that was for discussion only today. So we'll move on to the next item, which is a discussion of the ENS org chart. Several committee members have over the past several months indicated that they want to talk about that chart, and particularly the division administrator position. So if we could put that up, and if, Mr. Miller, if you want to talk again about, I think that what I'm trying to get out of this discussion today is giving us an opportunity to talk about the relative merits of changing this chart versus leaving it as it is. And then if we want to, we can't obviously make a decision today. It's not on the agenda as an action item. We would have to agenda at some future meeting. But for discussion purposes, maybe Mr. Miller, you could reiterate your concerns about this, then the committee members can respond.
Okay. I am attempting, oh, there it is. You've got it up. Okay, great. So as I understand the question, it's whether or not the ENS director position, which we created a couple years ago, should be removed from the organizational chart. My comments would be that the need that we identified, the desirability of the position has not changed. The steps we took, which was an organizational change, took an ordinance to create the position. The things that we identified are still items that need to be addressed. The value of leaving the organizational chart as it is about options. As long as the position remains, whether or not it gets funded and filled will remain a question that this committee can recommend on and the county board can ultimately act on in the future. If we take it out and subsequently find that the same need exists, we have to go through that process all over again. There's nothing about the existing organizational chart, however, that compels us to fill the position now. It identifies the need. We want to evaluate it annually, whether or not we have the resources to fill it. So it simply gives us the options. My recommendation to this committee would be to leave the position in the organizational chart as a sign of our prior evaluation, our identification of a need, and a goal, ultimately, that if we ever get the resources, it is a position we would fill to improve the organization, to improve the communication, and to address those issues that we addressed when we created the position, including the committee by management difficulties that exist under the current actual on the ground arrangement for the ENS department.
Thanks, Paul. Committee members, any people have asked to talk about this? Any questions, any comments?
Mr. Chair?
Supervisor Kinnear.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was a little over 3 years ago that we did this, and there were some difficulties at the time. And it took us quite a bit of time to agree to this. We really had some misgivings as to what to do. And I think even if we were looking back then and thinking the same way, things have changed. Now we have one less department or division. Things are going along smoothly. So things have changed. Leaving it in, it's always there to try to fill. And I think having an extra layer of communication, administration is not good at all. It seems like it would encourage the siloing again of the 3 different divisions. And, a big one, it costs more. So extra layer, it costs more. Those are 2 main things that I don't want to see this on here. Unless I didn't understand, I thought perhaps there was a suggestion by Mr. Miller this year to use that position and fill it. So, and finally, the communication and budget, if we're hiring a planning and zoning administrator, that was supposed to be part of the ENS director's job. So, what would they do? And by the way, we added the ENS director and senior planner at the same time 3 years ago. So, and finally, to Mr. Miller's comment about give us options, we always have the option of adding it back in. It would take 1 meeting of our committee if we wanted it, and then I don't know 1 or 2 from the county board. So I'd like to see it out of there. I don't want to see it used at all, or even the option to use it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Anybody else have a comment or a thought? Is there interest in having this up for consideration as an action item at some point in the next few months or month?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Yes, there is interest. I guess, am I the only one that has not seen a job description of the ENS director? If that were applied, in other words, I would want to know more about what are the responsibilities and duties of the ENS director. That's one question. And like Supervisor Kinnear, I guess, we've got our survey division is clear, at least to me, under Tom, and land and water conservation, Chase and people. We're talking mostly about the planning and land control division. And maybe I am the one that does need more clarification, but so back to my first question, is there a job description for the ENS director? What would that person do? Thank you.
Paul, you want to answer that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there is Supervisor Anderson. We'd be happy to provide it for the committee's review, and we'll do so.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've all struggled with this over these 3 years, but sitting here listening, yes, I would like us to talk about this further. I think I think at least I somewhat reluctantly agreed with this some years ago because I think we did really have problems in communication and coordination, leadership, and I don't think that we have those any longer. I think our staff has doing a wonderful job. I think they're doing a great job of coordinating across the 3 divisions. It just does not seem that this is necessary to me, particularly as we are proposing that the zoning administrator take on some additional kind of outside zoning responsibilities for economic development. It just doesn't seem prudent, particularly in our financial circumstances and the changed leadership in the division.
Any other comments? Anyone opposed to having this put on a future agenda for possible action? Okay, let's not beat it to death then. For today, that's enough discussion. We will do that at some point in the near future when we have time and go from there. Let's move down to number 8. And if without objection, let's move item B up ahead of item A. And for this meeting, at the last meeting, we had the division managers go through their budgets. For the purpose of this discussion, I'd like to ask Mr. Miller, Mr. Stray to go through it and have the managers be prepared to respond to any points that they raise or the committee raises. So Paul, could you lead us through this, please?
Sure. Tom, do you want to stop sharing your screen and I'll share mine? That'll let me run the show here. Here it is. Okay, can everybody see the summary here?
Yep.
Okay. What we've done, Keith, Stray, and I, for a couple of the other standing committees, is sort of walk through, this is the July 28th version of the budgets that were submitted, walk through highlighting where we see the biggest changes, if you will, and ask the managers to address those. So that's the approach I'm going to take here. And it looks like, make sure we can all see. First, we're dealing with revenues, correct? And I see this is a surveyor. So Tom, maybe you could address just real quick, you're projecting a 32% increase in revenues from land division. What do you think is driving that?
2 things. Number 1 is a revised fee schedule that this committee has approved a couple months ago, which is directly tied to our new land division ordinance. So that alone will increase our revenue. And then also the number of certified survey maps coming in, we've seen a sizable increase. We're roughly double right now at this time over last year. So at our last meeting, with input from myself, the committee and I agreed to raise the number of certified survey maps projected to come in from 65 to, I want to say we raised that to 75. So between those 2 things, more maps coming in next year is what we're projecting, and also increased fees.
Okay. And then the down.
Question, Mr. Survey, or
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, can we count on that increase, like revenue, before we get that like land division ordinance passed?
Well, I made that point last time. This projected revenue is predicated, I guess, on our ordinance being adopted. If that ordinance, say, doesn't go into effect until April of next year, well, that's 4 months that we're not going to realize as much revenue. We're still going to get revenue, but just not at the increased level. So yes, to answer your question, our fee schedule is tied to our new ordinance, and until the new ordinance is officially adopted and codified, those fees are not applicable.
So how much or what percentage would our fees increase, like roughly average overall? Would they go up by 10%, 15%, or what would you say is the average for next year?
I'm not quite sure I understand that or can answer. I mean, right now we're looking at a 32% increase. I mean, the base fee for a certified survey map right now is $200 for one lot. And I believe, I don't have the fee schedule in front of me. I think we raised that to $250. So it's do the math here quick, but it looks like about a 25% increase.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure if I answered your question there, Supervisor Bjork.
Yeah, you answered it, but I just want to take all the different fees and just get a feeling, but that was close enough. Thank you.
Okay, and again, anytime anybody has any questions as I kind of navigate through this, please do jump in. It's a minor change, the 16% drop, $500 less on charges to highway. Tom, what's driving that?
This is somewhat of a moving target. John Swirsky and I meet every year. He has a rough idea of the projects he's going to be working on next year, and then we sit down and figure out our involvement in those projects. Sometimes the projects that he anticipates dry up or are delayed or pushed back another year. Sometimes, next year comes around and he's got 2 extra projects we didn't anticipate happening. So this is a projection. The highway department in recent years has acquired some surveying equipment. So they are doing some of the work in-house that we used to do for them and charge them for. So it's tough. It's a moving target, but we're projecting a small increase in the work that we're going to be doing for them next year. It's very difficult to project.
Okay. Moving on, I think I know the answer on this one, Chase, but the loss of the local reimbursement on land and water conservation, can you address that?
Sure, thank you. Basically, this is some revenue that we were getting from the city of Menominee, dating back to, I believe, 2015, as a part of the creation of the water resource conservation planner position. It was my understanding, and part of the conversation also was had at the last meeting about the work that position is doing also benefited the city. Therefore, the city was willing to contribute some of that work. That 15,000 has fluctuated in recent years due to whether we had a full-time position or person in that position. And currently in 2021, we are not receiving any funding from the city. They have gone through some other changes and other personnel changes, and I guess that's their decision to not contribute to that anymore. I'm not certain that was a long-term expectation of the city at the time, based on my work. Looking into 2022, I did reach out to the city to discuss it, and they confirmed that they will not be contributing any more funds in that line item. So again, that was a revenue line item for the department. Yes, it was somewhat tied to a position, but it was not part of the funding for that position directly, I guess.
And then the 50% reduction in program revenue on the MDV?
Sure. So that funding source fluctuates from year to year depending on the amount of funds available through the Department of Natural Resources. Based on our estimates at the time of preparing this and currently, we're expecting a decrease in those funds available. There is some projections by DNR that money actually may drastically increase above the 5,000, but it's too early to tell. And based on the trend in that, we're expecting that to go down. And that is a revenue source that is matched by expenses. So, if the revenue goes down, the expense goes down as well.
Thank you. Like I say, my approach is to kind of zero in where I see sort of significant changes. General office, general fund, I'm not sure what drives that, but that 27% reduction in revenues is a reduction in the levy ask. It looks like what's driving that? Tom or Chase?
If you could scroll down, Paul, the general office is near the end of the budget.
I on my screen, I'm running my cursor over it right now.
It'd be down in the expenditure section, Paul. We're
Okay,
still,
well, I guess what I'm looking at is the revenue here.
right, no, I understand, but I think what Tom is getting to is it's driven by the expenditure side.
Okay, I'm going to play dense, which is something that comes naturally to me. So general office taxes, general property, $11,000 was last year. Yes, adopted. That's revenue, and now we're showing 27% less revenue in the same thing for 22. And I'm just asking why the drop in the revenue.
The bottom line answer is they don't have as much as an expenditure, so they don't need as much tax levy to operate.
Oh, okay. So the expenditures are down as well. All right.
And if,
Yeah, I told you I could play dense.
I don't know if you want to skip to that, but I mean, a lot of that was due to contribution for the Red Cedar Watershed Conference. Our contribution as a sponsor has changed by about 2,000, and then a few adjustments in the maintenance contracts for some of our copy machines and things. So,
Thank you. Looking at zoning, I know we don't have, I don't think we have Bob Colson on. He's working for us on contract, but he's in Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I think, for the most part. But you can see that the adjustment there was adjusted to 5-year projects laid out. So that explains the change in revenue there. Again, in planning, there's a pretty substantial jump, and that's for, it says for result of requested funding for a new zoning enforcement planner. Oh, yes. Okay. So I can answer on that one. We have a vacant zoning enforcement position that we are recommending, that is staff from your county manager to your CFO are recommending be filled. It is a new position. Not a new position, but it is filling a vacant position. We think what will be desirable for the zoning division is a zoning administrator, a person who does primarily sanitary inspection and administration. That would be Michelle. The on-site zoning technician / administrative assistant, Janet, and then a person to do zoning enforcement. So Michelle is doing site checks on sanitary permits. This position would be doing the site checks on setbacks and complaints and things of that nature. We think that that's necessary to provide the minimum coverage for the scope of duties. And that's what this recommendation, this 206% increase, is to accommodate. And I'd be happy to try to field any questions committee members may have on that.
Paul, have you considered filling part of that with, let's say, a contracted employee?
Yeah, yes, we did look into that, Chairman Quinn, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult to find the person, to find the time. And the rates are going to be about what we end up paying somebody like Bob Colson for now, but for a position that wouldn't be a zoning administrator position. So we think that this is the best solution, the on-staff zoning enforcement position.
So, Mr. Miller, just so I understand, so that would be about $119,000 increase for the one position?
Yes. That's salary and benefits.
Thank you.
So what, if I may, Mr. Chair? So
Yes.
what's the workload increase over what we had last year? Was our zoning administrator, was Bob way behind in everything? Is that what's moving this forward to have another position, or why are we doing this?
And the answer is yes. Bob Colson expressed several times that without having somebody available to do, to help with zoning permit administration, to do site checks, to do follow-ups on complaints and things of that nature, that he had to do them, which made him have very little or no time for planning projects. Things were simply having to be shelved because he literally did not have time to handle the zoning administration, boots on the ground portion in particular of the administration, and deal with the planning issues in a timely manner as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Burke.
I talked to a plumber last week, and he does a lot of business in Dunn County and St. Croix County on new homes and that. And he was saying years ago that Dunn County was the easiest to work with. They got the permits and the site inspection done on a very timely manner. And right now, they are the worst county to work with for getting stuff done on time. So I'm all for filling this position.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to do a comment that I've been doing at all of these meetings, and that's, as we're going through this, and this particular line item is adding quite a bit to the levy, we have to realize that if all the committees bring back the recommendation of their budget for those departments as it was presented on this one on the 28th, that our administrative team bringing us an example of a balanced budget will have to be cutting that levy budget by about 2.7 million, if I remember right. So I just want to bring that to the committee's attention, that this is our time, the committee's time, to weigh in on what's going to happen in the future on the budget. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Kinnear.
Yeah, I always thank Dave when you remind us of that. And yeah, it's a tough decision. We've had a planning zoning administrator and a zoning specialist, basically, is all we've had for the couple of open positions, really. So I think it's tough, but if we're going to serve the public, we've got to do something about it. And I don't know where the 2.6 million is going to come from, Dave. But this is something it seems like we have to do. It's not I don't know if you call it mandated, but we've got to serve the public. So I agree with Gary Bjork. I hope we can fill this to do our job. Thank you.
I'm not talking against this position. I in fact agree that I think we need it. If you look at all our meetings, the PR&D meetings in the last year, there was a lot of discussion about needing more help in that department. And I have seen complaints. In fact, there's one just recently on, not getting to a zoning question or a complaint. So I'm not faulting that we need this. It was just the time that I felt I should bring that up because I haven't for a while. I haven't at this meeting anyway, and I meant to.
Okay, hey, I have a follow-up question with Mr. Miller on that I asked that one new position, $119,000. That seems high even with benefits. What's the base salary then?
I don't have that answer in front of me.
Okay.
What I can tell you, however, is that the number comes from HR. So it is based on what we've identified as the appropriate grade. And it projects at least step 1, potentially up to step 3, since the manager has the right, without getting any outside approval to.
Mr. Chair, I
Go
can
ahead.
speak to that
Go
if
ahead.
you wish. I do have the wage and benefit schedule up for that position. If you bear with me just 1 second, I'll get to that. The new position, typically we budget at step 3 in the pay brand with full family benefits. That's a conservative budgeting approach. The base salary is $75,712. And I believe that's based on historical. Again, HR does put that together based on the pay plan and where this position was slated. Then you add in the benefits, the total cost is just short of $120,000.
And I will add to that I looked at this and remembering that we had a position that was funded but unfilled, I'm thinking that I noticed the benefits went up significantly. And I'm thinking that last year, because that was an unfilled position, it was still funded, but probably the benefits were not figured in as highly or at all because it wasn't filled as compared to just the wage.
I know I can speak to benefits. Every year they change. Heck, between now and the end of the year with open enrollment, you could have people that are budgeted this year based on current situation at family, they'll elect single or vice versa. And we've had turnover within these teams and people electing different benefits. So, but specific to this open position, yeah, we did budget at family. I don't know about that open position last year.
Shall I move on?
Yep, let's go on.
Okay, so bottom line, we're looking at revenue increase of almost 7% for the reasons that we've iterated. This now gets us into expenses. What we observe up here in this first part, these are the wages and benefits section. This comes from HR. We initially projected a 2% adjustment to the county's pay grid. We are close to receiving the results of our comp class study that will change that. But these numbers are not generated by your ENS managers. They are the numbers that were plugged in or provided for everybody, every department. Are there any in particular questions about that? If not, I'm going to again try to zero in here. I'm not sure how. Oh, I was going to say look like the same number, but it is slightly different, isn't it? I'm not going to focus unless there's particular questions, and anybody should feel free to jump in on numbers that are pretty small, even if percentages are pretty large, as in cell phone. But anybody who has a question, please feel free to ask it. So I'm just scrolling down here, kind of eyeballing the changes that are made and see what jumps out that might be a point worth asking. Those are again salaries and benefits. In this case, this is land and water conservation. Whoa, what happened with the cell phones here, Chase?
Yeah, so basically we have one cell phone for the department. It's a flip phone that is used for construction to try to communicate with contractors. So we're not using personal phones for that type of thing while out in the field. This was simply a request to look at providing another cell phone for the department, the division, fully knowing that it may be cut from the budget, but it is a request that I put in there to look at providing better communication, especially with our contractors who are now texting and that's their preferred method of communication. Can we function without it? We can, but it is something that would provide some benefit to our staff when they're trying to work with contractors in the field. In addition, looking at documentation within the field, taking pictures. Right now staff are not doing that with their personal phones. It's just too big of a risk for public records and that sort of thing. So this would help to try to alleviate some of that. So.
Thank you. So I'm going to continue to scroll here. I think the note on your small equipment's sales and whatnot are self-explanatory. Any of these things that, again, committee members have questions about, please interrupt me and ask me to some details on. Now down to the general office questions or details. There's the reduction in maintenance costs of 31% for the general office. Looks like that's copy machine cost has gone down for that maintenance. Showing fewer conferences or seminars. Chase, you want to weigh in on that $2,000 difference?
Yeah, that basically is the sponsorship for the Red Cedar Watershed Conference, a local conference. Dunn County has been the platinum sponsor for several years of contributing $5,000 through discussion and preparing this budget. It was decided to enter a reduced rate for that sponsorship. We will still be one of the top sponsors for that conference, but this $3,000 will be consistent with the city of Menominee and a couple other sponsors that are at that level. So that's the facts behind that.
Okay, thank you. Under zoning, and Keith, you may have to weigh in on this one too. We've talked about funding the vacant zoning enforcement position, but it looks like under zoning, the salaries and wages are shown as dropping. Can you help me parse that?
I believe there's a separate cost center for planning. This is the zoning.
Okay. Okay.
So when we scroll down, you should see an increase in the planning budget.
All right. Got a slight increase in maintenance contracts here. Oh, I see a reduction in the cell phone here. Chase, are you planning to steal zoning cell phone? Was that the idea?
No, that wasn't the intent.
I'm being facetious, of course. We're hoping to show less contracting service for zoning inspections. This in part must reflect the intention to fill the zoning enforcement officer position. There may still be those who want the expedited review if that's something we're offering through Cedar Core, but it is a reduction.
Is that item offset by revenue on top?
This item here is reduction in expenses.
Yes.
So.
Well, the expenses, it's a reduction, but it's still an expense. Is that
Yes.
expense offset by revenue on top?
I can't, I'm not certain. I would, if I were doing this myself, then if I'm showing less expense, I'm trying to arrange it so that any of those consulting services are paid by the end user as opposed to by the county. We've talked about that before, you know, the subsidy that exists when we rely on levy. Perhaps.
Maybe Mr. Carlson could respond to that.
Tom, do you know?
I do not know that.
Okay.
No.
I will make a note, Chairman Quinn, to follow up on that, and I'll work with Keith and Bob Colson when he's in to get you that answer.
Okay.
Thank you. Conferences and seminars for zoning are down. 2 attending 1. So there's the rationale there. There's the increase in planning for the zoning enforcement officer, who's also be involved in planning. Then you can see the changes to the benefits as a result as well. Under asset, vehicles, and equipment, see a 50% reduction in the expense there. New item, Land Water Conservation District, 28,000, purchase of a half-ton truck. Chase, is that's yours? Is that part of it? Was that on our CIP or what?
Yes, that was part of the CIP. So that, I guess, part of maintaining the fleet, that Dodge Durango 2006 is up for meeting that requirement. Therefore, I entered it into the budget.
Okay. Which brings us down to the end. Again, that same nearly 7% change in expenses matches the number in revenues that were proposed. So,
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yes, Mr. Stratton.
Following up on your question, I'm working on a separate system here so I can look up the revenues, and it is my understanding from conversation with Mr. Colson before he left when we reviewed budgets that part of that $50,000 of consulting fees, not 100%, because you can have consulting for miscellaneous projects, but that is wrapped into the permits and fees for zoning and if they need for sanitary permits as well. So I believe it is wrapped into those fees. There wasn't a corresponding increase in those because really that expense shift was representing the fact that instead of contracting out with us adding that, proposing to add that new position, that's where the cost would go up and you'd reduce your consulting costs because you would hope you'd be able to do it with that new position or some of it at least.
Thanks, Keith.
so that would conclude the review that staff level, unless Tom or Chase, I've left out any important element of your budgets.
So question, Mr. Chair, for Mr. Miller,
Yes.
because it looks like it's going to be really hard to take any money away from the divisions. So does that mean we're going to have to maybe like eliminate some program, a part of the division to make up that $2 million in deficit?
No, when we take the higher level, I mean, remember from the July 28, we had about a $5 million deficit, but the budget process is dynamic as new information comes in, and so is staff's response. So we've already talked about at the Highway Committee how the bulk of that deficit was in the form of construction projects, $4.2 million approximately. But then what the July 28 budget also didn't include is any potential use of ARPA money. So what Keith Stray and I are going to do when we put our heads together and try to come up with an example of a balanced budget is take into account not only the initial requests, but the changes that have come in. We'll also get the comp class study. We've got another fairly substantial personnel issue that we haven't we're not prepared to talk about in public. That needs to be factored in as well. In any event, I do not at this time anticipate elimination of a program. Because I'm looking forward. I do not at this time anticipate that. Also, I do not at this time, specific to this request, think that we will end up, including in our example budget, not funding this zoning enforcement position. I think we'll be able to do it. It reflects priorities like everything else, but I think that we'll be able to accommodate it. As Keith likes to say, the devil's in the details. I tend to operate and look at the overall picture. And then he's always trying to pull me down to earth and tell me that I've got to look at the details, which I grudgingly do. So that's just my anticipation at this time. I don't think we're going to have to cut programs.
No, that sounds real good, but because I kind of remember a couple of years ago that we like eliminate home health
We
care
did.
or something.
We
You
did.
know, so I just wondered if there's anything along that vein that might pop up in the future, but
It's a
sounds like
possibility
not.
every year.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Supervisor Morehouse.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up, I guess, for Paul and Keith. I mean, I think we do seriously need that position, but I was just wondering, the likelihood that we're going to lose it in the ongoing negotiations. I would hope not, but what do you think?
I'm cautiously optimistic that we will be able to fund the position.
And if I could, I'd like to add, other committees have done this in the past. Judicial and Law, I think the last couple of years has looked at positions like this that are looking to be filled. And, the initial iteration is funding for the full year. Last night, Judicial and Law acted on one position and funded it for hiring and filling effective July 1st. So that has helped budgetarily. I know we've done that with emergency management. So those are some considerations by the standing committees and everybody involved in the process that you can fund the position, but if you're running into, ability to finance it, or at least you want to phase it in, that's another consideration point I just want to bring up for the committee.
Thank you, Keith. And earlier, Paul, you mentioned that this is an ongoing process and that the inputs and the targets change. And I know that in the case of the land conservation budget, for example, there are some anticipated state revenue changes that we won't know about for certain until for another month or so. But if they come through, that will change some of the revenue projections there also. So that'll help. Anybody else have any questions about? We need to, what I'm hearing is that we're not prepared to, at this point in time, it doesn't seem like, recommend any changes at this point to the proposed budget. Does anyone disagree with that? Then is there a motion to recommend this budget to the board, to administration?
Mr. Chairman, I will move approval of the July 28th budget as reviewed.
Is there a second?
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor of the resolution, say aye.
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 Opposed? No. Motion carries. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Keith. I think we have one remaining item, and that's the review of the legislative agenda. Mr. Carlson and I think Janelle did spend some time sort of summarizing our conversation from last time. And this is I think they captured where we left it. So anyone have any changes or additions they'd like to make to this? If not, could we have a motion to approve this as our legislative agenda? Well,
Mr. Chairman, I will move approval of this legislative agenda as submitted today.
thank you, Diane. Is there a second?
I will second it.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, take another look at it. Any discussion? It was noted in the public comments that there was support for retaining some language on local septic. It's not in there right now. We could have another item which would be support increased access to septic spreading reports, to increase access to septic spreading data to counties. Correct that. I would suggest this.
Wasn't there an item last year about, wasn't it about local control of
Yeah.
seepage?
Yeah, we could put that back in if you want.
We pulled that out, right?
Well, we talked about pulling it out, yeah. We could put that same item back in there if that would be appropriate. We didn't really talk about it last time. So that's that's one thing that's missing that was mentioned in public comments and it was brought up last time. Is there interest in restoring that item, which basically said provide for a level of local control over septic spreading?
And Tom, if you give me just a minute or two, I'll see if I can pull up that
Okay.
document. Give me just a second here.
Well, Tom's doing that. Just mentioned that Terry Nichols, one of his reasonings was that, so at least it lets them know that we're thinking about it.
Yeah.
Can't remember exactly, but I hadn't thought about that when we took it out.
Right, and I think one of the struggles we had when we were looking at this was I believe it was difficult to get the data. That was what Bob was saying, is he was struggling to actually get access to current data. And so that would be an element that would be part of it also.
Okay, Tom. I'm going to share my screen here. So this is our legislative agenda for this year.
Yeah, there it is. A.
So it'd be number A, support local control of land spreading. Allowing local, so if a local government wanted to have some say, they could. Is there any way to modify that statement so that it maybe is more appropriate to what we want?
Are you talking about access to data, Tom?
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons we took it out was because it's kind of a far reach.
Yeah.
But getting data, that I think that's something we should all be able to have. I like your idea of the data idea.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Gary.
I kind of like the way it is, but it appears the way it's written that it would be totally controlled by the local. And I think we're missing out on a lot of state expertise. You maybe be part of the process but the way it's written now, it looks almost like it'd be total control
Right,
for the
I
local,
agree. I
you know,
agree.
like that.
Well, how could we rewrite it?
That's a good one for Michael. He's always good at that. Right, Mike?
Oh,
About support providing local government with increased access to data and permitting of human septic spreadage.
Even something
Right.
like local input. Just put like,
Okay.
like input in there. That would kind of say that we'd have some say into it.
Support allowing local input and access to data on land spreading of human septage.
that's good. You got it.
Support, sorry, Janelle, support allowing local input and access to data for land spreading of human septage.
That sounds perfect to me.
Anyone want to make that a motion? Gary?
I'd like to add a comment. If you remember, it wasn't that we couldn't get the data. The problem was we had to have somebody go get the data that they didn't provide it for us. And that
Right.
was the roadblock, that the expense of us having somebody go and look through their records to find the data was just overwhelming. So I don't know if we want to, they should be able to come up with that data easier, it seems to me, than us having to go get it.
Yeah, I think that reminds me, Dave, of what it was. So before we make a motion, let's modify it a little bit. So support providing efficient access to local governments, provide efficient input and data access for local governments in land spreading of, regarding land spreading of human septage. Support allowing effective access to data and local input on land spreading of human septage.
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so the motion, again, if we get it right, support allowing efficient access and input to local government in land spreading of human, on land spreading of human septage. Does that make sense in the English language?
Is there access to data? Did you have access to data in the statement, Tom?
Yeah, support allowing efficient access and input for local governments regarding land spreading of human septage.
I think support for allowing efficient access to data
I think so.
as a separate, and then
Uh-huh.
local input
Yep.
for land spreading of septage.
So support allowing efficient access to data and local input with regarding land spreadage of human septage.
Yep.
Support for allowing efficient access to data and local control of land spreading on human septage.
Input or control?
Input, yeah, local input, yep. Well, I think we'll get that pretty close. Is that your motion, Gary?
Yes, it is.
Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman, I will second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of adding that item to the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
I-
Now, can we have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
I so approve,
Mike?
or make the motion, I mean.
Yeah,
I'll second the motion.
Jim seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor of the agenda as amended, say aye.
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 Opposed? No? Okay, carries.
We're done.
Think that's the end of the agenda. Any announcements?
Yes, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I want to make a special tribute to the Tribune Press, especially Leanne Ralph, who always reports on our committee meetings. And I know she does also for my CR&T meeting. And it's always so accurate. And I think that's one way for the public to be able to read what we're doing. And I think it's the only newspaper that reaches here. Of course, it's Glenwood City, but Boyceville and then Colfax. And I want her to know that I appreciate, because when I read what she reports, it's always accurate and it's timely, and I think it's informative to the public. So I'd like to make that announcement.
I would second your announcement. And over the years, Leanne has been one of the most thoughtful and objective reporters of local affairs we've had. And she's a real, I think we all agree in thanking her for providing that, whether we like what she says or not. It's accurate and it's well written and covers things in a way that people can understand it. So much appreciated.
I echo that, and she also not only the PRD and CRT, but the county board meetings and the county as a whole, where nobody else reports on what we do.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate what the papers do.
And one comment, every person in leadership in the county, just because of their job, whether it's township or county board, should have a subscription to one of the Colfax or Glenwood City papers.
That's right.
Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing that our anyway. Yes, I agree. Any other comments or announcements? Is county picnic today?
It's canceled.
Oh, it was canceled, really?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I didn't see that. Okay.
We knew,
Okay, I didn't go up.
we knew there was going to be a thunderstorm. No, it was canceled because of the COVID surge.
Yeah, okay. All right, I guess that's all we have today. So our next meeting will be September 14th. Thanks, everybody. Have a good holiday coming up. Take care.
Stay healthy.